Torah Resource is made possible through the generous donations of people like you. If you would like to help us continue to produce this kind of material, please consider making a donation at TorahResource.com. All right, Vayera. Which means, and he appeared. So the portion today is Genesis 18:1 through 22:24. And once again, like the last Torah portion, this one is just they've really crammed together several major stories, right? We have two different occurrences of Abraham giving Rachel, not saying anything when a king takes Sarah, I'm sorry. I said Rachel. I meant Sarah. Takes Sarah and attempts to marry her or take her for himself. And two different times. Surprising, of course. He doesn't learn his lesson the first time, which is a little bit of a comfort to me, because it's like you got this guy who is who clearly the Lord is wrapped up with, and yet he seems to waver on faith a couple of times. But then, of course, we have the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which is the ultimate I trust you, Lord, kind of step. Also, we have the Sodom and Gomorrah story. We have the Lot story, and just a lot going on. There's a lot going on. And there's some interesting things with Lot that I'm confused about as well. But as per our normal arrangements, I'm going to first pass this one over to Mr. Van Hoff. Mr. Van Hoff, tell me your thoughts on Vayera.
Wow, yeah, there's so much. One place that I think people who are more familiar with the New Testament might kind of enter in is Hebrews chapter 13, where it says, it's Hebrews 13 verse 2, and the basic message is, don't forget to entertain strangers, because, there's been times where people don't even know it, but they're entertaining angels, right? They're showing hospitality to angels.
Let's read it real quick. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Something I talked with my children just the other night about.
And so that if we look at our Torah portion, verse 2, it says, he lifted up his eyes, and behold, v'hinei shlosha anashim nitzavim alav. Anashim. Now, this is a word for men. 3 men are there, right? But later, we know they're malachim. Right. They're angels. And so there's a whole discussion. Before we even get, we're 2 verses into the Torah portion, and we have this opening of a discussion of if we know the story, for those of us who know the story, it's like, wait a minute. Does Abraham know that these are, what does Abraham think these are? Does he think, these are like heavenly beings with wings flapping around, non-human? Or does he think that he's treating them like they're human? I mean, they sit down, they eat, right? He says, let's cool, let's wash your feet, cool off.
I'm with you, but hang on just a second. In verse 3, it seems as though we've already had, and I thought about this too, because Abraham's already had the Lord appear to him, right? God has already appeared to Abraham. We've seen this in the previous passage. Yeah.
He's got a relationship with God, clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and in 18:3, it says, and said, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight." So it seems to me like he knows that one of them, he recognizes one of them.
He knows that he just knows that he trusts that somehow God is involved in these 3 visitors. This has something to do with God. That's my thought initially. Now, of course, at the end, we know, I think it's if we go to chapter 19, I think we see where it says the 2 malachim So now it's like, okay, are they messengers now? Are they angels? And so
Can we pause one more time
to differentiate? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, but back to the idea of Abraham knowing, at least knowing the Lord, right, and recognizing the Lord. It reminds me of John 10:27 following. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. So, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them. It just reminds me when he says, "Oh Lord," it's like, to me it feels like he recognizes the Lord. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So we have a situation where we're not told in the text Abraham knew that these were angels or something like that. We're not told that. All we see is his behavior. And his behavior, he's showing hospitality. He's like, let's rest, get comfortable, wash your feet, cool off in the shade because it's hot out. It says it's a hot day. Let's get you some food and some refreshment. And so he's like, we just see him. And I think the verb to run in Hebrew, larutz, to run, is used many times. And he ran here and then he ran. Like, it's, in other words, right. It's a priority. Like, this is a special event. And of course, he is talking to the Lord at the time. And so it's dawning on Abraham. But it's easy to, I don't know how to say it. Well, let me say this. We get to chapter 19, and we see the similar thing. We see the men, the angels come to Lot, and they're in Lot's house. And Lot, we'd have to say, does Lot know that these are angels? I think that if Hebrews 13:2 is talking about anything in the Bible, it must be talking about our Torah portion, at least, like Abraham receiving the 3 men, Lot receiving the 2 men. We, right, the reader, know more, right? What we know as the reader is different than what Lot knew or what Abraham knew. And I think that's important to remember, because here, and this comes into play also where the men of Sodom come and they say, "Oh, let us out here so we can, talk about this perversity they want to do," right? They think they're men. They don't think that, it's not like these, some people, and they take that verse in Jude and think, oh, this means that the men of Sodom and Gomorrah, lusted after angels or something like that. And that's not what that means at all. This is, and so we have to be careful of what we're projecting onto the text versus what is the text teaching us. So I think, just to recap all that Hebrews 13:2 is a helpful verse, that there's times when you're behaving to how we behave to other people. Because I think 13:1 of Hebrews talks about abiding in brotherly love. And the idea of like, well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean like, oh, I wonder if this is an angel or not, or I wonder if this is a human or not. It's treating humans a certain way, recognizing that there could be some divine appointments here. There could be, is it Michael Landon? Who was the TV show where I think he was an angel?
Oh yeah,
Michael,
Quantum
Highway
Leap.
to Heaven.
Oh no, we're thinking of two different things. But yes, I understand what you're saying.
Anyway, so there is an element there about that. But one of the big, just to kind of shift to a different center of the Torah portion, is in chapter 19 or chapter 18, later in chapter 18 rather, where the Lord and Abraham are going back and forth about the righteous and the wicked. And there's a line in there where Abraham says, will the shofet kol haaretz ya'aseh mishpat, will not the judge of all the world do justice. And so there's a little hint of Abraham's theology there. He sees God, and we learned that from last week's Torah portion in Genesis 14. He says, I have sworn by El Elyon, Kone, possessor of heaven and earth, right? That he tells the king of Sodom that I will not accept even anything from you, lest you say, Avram made me rich, But here, so Abraham has a concept of God as owner, possessor of heaven and earth. Here, he refers to God as Shofet Kol Haaretz, the judge of all the earth. So the judge. So not only what is Abraham's concept of God, that he is the owner of all things, but that he is the judge also, and that he is a judge who rules justly. And Abraham's concern is, okay, well, you can't just go destroy a city, God, because that would violate something about what I know to be true about your character. And so Abraham's like, he's like, well, what if there was like 50 righteous? Are you still going to destroy the whole city? Like, that doesn't sound right to me. And so God, they actually have this back and forth, right? And finally it gets down to, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, this is one of the things that I continue to notice within this entire passage is that Abraham treats God like obviously there's reverence there, right? He understands that he's, and just talking about some of the names that are used for God throughout this passage, El Olam is also used, right? Father, or God of eternity. But it seems like there is much more of a personal, almost a human connection. Abraham is willing to negotiate back and forth. He's willing to be like, whoa, wait. At what point do we think of negotiating with the God of the universe and being like, hey, hang on, you can't do that. It's almost like there's a different kind of relationship there that Abraham has with God than what I think the modern mainstream Christian church and just believers in general today think of as having. It seems much more real and personable than how we think of God in high castles today. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have reverence for God. Obviously we should, but it just seems like there's much more of a personal connection that's different than the kind that I am used to. And maybe that's on me. Maybe that's me personally, but I don't hear a lot of people, at my church saying, yeah, I was debating with God whether or not he could do this, this past week. We don't hear a lot of that. So anyway,
one verse there in the middle of that, it's 18:27. Vaya'an Avraham Vayomer. So Abraham answered and said, Here I venture to speak to my Lord. But it says Vanochi afar va'efer, which means but I am merely dust and ashes. In other words, he's walking this tightrope of
right. Yes,
it's like right at the core intention of Abraham's heart is he's like, look, I am dust and ashes. I'm nothing, right? But I have a concern for justice. And so he's like, I can't not speak out for the righteous. Right? There is a something about the way God wired his people that they, when reduced, to cry out for true justice. And this could be Abel's voice that God hears. You're the voice of your brother. The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. In Revelation, it says that the souls of the righteous are under the altar crying out, how long, O Lord? And so the idea is there is something that God made and it probably relates to us being made in God's image, that among his elect, a cry out for his justice. Not now we see in the world, there's atheists who have like social justice in the world. They cry out for justice, but those ultimately end up being like virtue signaling, and it's really it's like a social performance. It is really rebellion, right? It's rebellion against God often. The idea of social justice and all this, because by faith we cry out for justice. Why? Because we know that it has to come from God. That you can't. And that's why the judges in Israel are, it says in Deuteronomy 1, when those men who fear God, they hate a bribe, they are not respecters of persons, and they're given a position to make rulings, and they're supposed to hear a case, and they hear a case fully, and it says they give a ruling, and that the ruling isn't theirs. It says the mishpat is God's. It's God's mishpat that they're giving. So true justice in this world isn't man's opinion.
Right.
It is from God, and the godly discern God's viewpoint and what is justice. And that is the ideal of the administration of the Torah for Israel, is not what you see in the New Testament times, right? Like in Jesus' day, the corrupt judges were corrupt. I mean, Yeshua even gives parables about, there was a judge. He didn't fear God. He didn't fear man. And he doesn't really care about this widow's case. But just because of her perseverance, he will give her justice. But so, I mean, why would that track? Why would that hit home for any of Yeshua's listeners unless they realized the conundrum of like, we have the Torah, but the courts are all crooked, I mean, there's injustice in the world that gets, because men are corrupt, and without the redeeming act of God on the heart of the individual, whatever we call justice won't be true justice. It's like the Isaiah, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. It's like we got our different definitions wrong. Abraham here is asserting, well, he's like, if there are righteous, what will you do? And God says, well, I'll forgive the whole city for this if there are justice. Abraham never says there are righteous there.
Right.
He said, I don't think so. I think he just says he gives these scenarios. But what if there are righteous there?
God ends up destroying the city anyway. So there's not that many righteous.
But he pulls Lot out.
Back to what you're saying, just bringing it into our time, our modern time today. My wife and I went to an event actually last night, and it was at a large business, and there was little other businesses inside that were trying to sell things and all this kind of stuff. And there were people there who were clearly of the world, right? And there was one man that was very, how should I say this? He was clearly batting for the other side. In other words, he was a very effeminate man. And I was just kind of observing him, and I said to my wife when we left, I said, I felt really bad for him, because I can tell that he finds his identity in sin. Like he finds his identity in sin, and to him, that is the moral high. He's on the moral high ground for that. So what would it be like to make up my own morality and then feel lonely, but I don't have anything to look to except for myself because I've made myself into God? And I feel like it, in the case of our Torah portion, what we have is we have people who they believe in other gods, or they believe in, they believe that they're doing right according to their whatever deity they believe in. But the idea of not believing in a God in that time, that's unheard of. Today, people have made themselves the deity. They're the ones who choose the moral high ground. My truth is something that we hear a lot, at least in the U.S. we hear it. And so just thinking of that, what they've done, what people who work under that kind of morality have done is they have made themselves into God. And when you feel alone, and when you're struggling in life, who can you look to at that point? You can't look to anybody except for yourself. And how devastating it would be for me to trust only in myself, right? I mean, it is a very sad thing. So I totally agree with you. Do you want to keep going on that thought pattern?
Yeah. So obviously you made the point that God does destroy the city. That means none of those conditions were met.
Right.
And instead, Lot is rescued, and for the sake of Abraham, right?
Right.
And if we remember about Lot too, who is Lot? It's his nephew. Well, that's because his brother died. Haran, Lot's brother, died. Or sorry, Lot's father, Avram's brother, Haran,
right,
had Lot. Haran died. And so Avram, at the time, now Abraham, took on Lot under his wing. And he's become part of his household, kind of like by an adoption. And so it's for that sake that it's for Abraham's sake that Lot is rescued. If you go and let's see if I can.
While you're looking for that, one of the things that I've noticed, first of all, I want to talk quickly about this. In 18:6, it says, "And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, 'Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes.'" So as the baker, the home baker inside of me instantaneously wanted to know how much bread he's making here. A seah, according to the ESV, a seah is about 7.3 liters. So I did the math, and we're looking at about 3,600 grams of flour, which would make approximately 7 full-size loaves. So he's making more bread than needed for 3 people.
Yeah, needed. Badoots. Another
So
a lot of.
I wonder if he's got servants helping, or if he's thinking of other people, or if he's going to send extra with them.
Kid, right? The whole animal.
Right. A lot of food. Keep going.
Point. Well, yeah, I was just looking at the verse where it is 1929, and it says, God destroyed the cities of the plain, annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt. But here we have that remember Vayiskol Elohim et Avraham, and God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out from the midst of the upheaval. So that means God didn't just say, "Oh, Lot, he's in a terrible place. I think I'll go rescue this guy." It had to do with the Abrahamic covenant. It had to do with the theme of redemption according to the Abrahamic promise. And we see that in the line of the Messiah. We have Moabitis and Ammonitis, Ruth, and then is it Naamia? I don't remember her name. The Rehoboam's mother through Solomon is Ammonitis. So there are 2 places in the line of Messiah, according to Matthew 1, that the Abrahamic covenant, this theme of redemption, was in mind, even with the crazy thing of like, oh, our father's going to get us pregnant and all this stuff, because all the weird stuff, that there is a redeeming principle here that governs what God is doing in the long run, in spite of how crazy it looks on the ground in the moment.
Can we just note that I don't understand why in the world Lot's there in the first place. Lot's supposed to have he's supposed to be herding his livestock right in the valley, and instead, and it says he pitched his tent as far as Sodom and Gomorrah. But then the next time we see Lot, he's in the city. Now, this isn't the only time that we have some weird, some odd placement of Lot. He comes out of Sodom and Gomorrah when it's going to be destroyed, and God tells him, or the angels tell him rather, go to the hill country, or go to the hills. And he says, no, I can't make it to the hills. Send me to this small little city. And God says, okay, go to the city. I can't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah until you go to the city. He goes to the city. God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. And then he goes up into the hills. So it seems like he's supposed to be in these places. And every time he's like, nah, I'm going to go somewhere else. Like he doesn't want to stay in the lane. And I don't know, I'm confused on why Lot's constantly pushing against where he's supposed to be.
Another, is it in, is that 2 Peter? Where does the Bible talk about Lot? And it says that his righteous soul was vexed.
Yeah. Because of
Sodom
and Gomorrah. Yeah, but why is he there in the first place? That's the point. He shouldn't be in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so here, I don't even know. I just Googled it. NIV of 2 Peter 2 has verse 7. It says, he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless. For that righteous man, living among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. So that's 2 Peter 2, 7 and 8. So you're right. Everything you said is right on. Why did he? I think this, and I think the Midrashic tradition has that he was appointed a judge in Sodom and Gomorrah
because he's in the gates.
So he's in the gates. So they're like, oh, that he was actually serving. He had a civic duty of doing judging, and that he saw this opportunity to take this position, so he took it. So, but definitely a shift from being a shepherd, right? Unless he still had shepherds doing work out, and then he would come in and do his judging. And that would fit because he said, who made you a judge over us? When the men are, beating down his door, there's a sense of like, they're thinking like you're a stranger and you're a judge. So there could be some validity, it's worth thinking about.
It's interesting you say that, though. It's interesting you say that, too, because I think that there is a legal problem in 1914. He offers his daughters to the men of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Now, everyone, of course, sees this and says, whoa, what's he doing? He shouldn't be doing this. From a God standpoint, right, he shouldn't be offering his daughters. He's the one who's supposed to protect his daughters, right? He's the one who's in charge of protecting them. So this is not... Even this is a legal standpoint, but ultimately, then in 1914, it says that they were engaged, that they had men who were going to be their husbands, and so I wrote down Lot should not have been able to give his daughters to the men, as money would have already been exchanged for his daughter's marriage. In other words, in that time, like a betrothal, there was a legal contract there. Money would have already been exchanged, all that kind of stuff. Now, granted that the text tells us that their soon-to-be husbands had not had sexual relationships with them, which means that that final act had not been made. But at the same time, if we look at marriage in the ancient Near East, even if we look at like Joseph and Mary, right? Joseph is going to go divorce her. Now they haven't had that final step in the marriage, but he's going to have to go divorce her because there's already been some kind of an exchange of some kind of vow, and some kind of money has already been exchanged for Mary. The same thing would have been the case for Lot's daughters and their soon-to-be husbands. There would have been an exchange of contract there. I don't think he had the legal right to even offer his daughters. So there's a lot going on with that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I've wondered
I'm on a tangent.
about that. Are the two daughters that he talks about the ones that are not married? Like did he have other daughters that were married? So
sure.
So I don't know how all that falls, and but I hear what you're saying. There is the situation of like, well, why is he, like you were pointing out earlier, Lot seems confused, and I think that. One thing, if we take that 2 Peter 2 passage where it says his righteous soul was vexed or was troubled by this lawlessness, that one thing we can see in his behavior is that he's lost focus. In other words, he's kind of bouncing around because he's lost anchoring. It's not that it's not that he doesn't believe in God. It's that he's not clear on good versus like this.
Right.
This Isaiah 5. Woe to those who call good evil. You hang out with a bunch of people who are calling evil good, and you're trying to live among them. Like, how do you keep your definitions of good and evil clear and distinct when you're living among people who have a flipped dictionary system?
Right.
It's like the Matt Walsh movie, am I racist or what is a woman? The idea of like when you're in our day and age, you go out and like literally there are people that won't define what a woman is, right? Well, that's like Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like he's got a definition of something that is according to Scripture, but the society he's living in has like warped the meanings. And so when you're dealing with this, it dulls our sword in a way. Like we got to be like the righteous. It's a high calling to be a child of God and to stay in the Word of God and to stay in prayer and to stay connected to other believers. Like without that, this is what happens. Like you get to it's bouncing around and you're not making good decisions. It doesn't mean Lot is evil. It means that his
compass
radar,
is off.
His Torah radar is skewed.
And that's another time that we see that Lot doesn't want to be in the place that he's supposed to be. The angels tell him to leave, and he stays in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they have to make him leave.
Grab him. Yeah. So there's another example. I'm glad you mentioned that. Where is that verse where they still he delayed, verse 16. So it says the
1919
grabbed his hand, or it says the man.
1916. I'm sorry. Yeah, 1916.
Well, that's our salvation right there. I mean, that's
right.
Our deliverance is we have to be rescued. We have to be rescued. We don't.
It's interesting you say that.
Some people's vision of salvation is like, oh, Jesus just has a big neon sign that the whole world could see. If the whole world could see this neon sign, if we could just get more people to see the sign, more people would go into the kingdom. How many people have been lost to the kingdom because we didn't have the neon sign on that says Jesus is that way, Jesus, salvation that way.
Right.
That's not how it works.
So it's interesting you say that because I think that obviously everyone thinks of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, as being a type of Yeshua, right? That Isaac represents Yeshua. Abraham here represents God willing to sacrifice his own son for our sins. God will provide for himself a lamb, right? There's all these imageries, and we do have to be careful with types. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go look up what types are in the Bible. We have to be careful, but at the same time, if we take the Akedah as a type of Yeshua, and then we look at Sodom and Gomorrah, like no one ever attaches Sodom and Gomorrah to that type. But if we go back to Sodom and Gomorrah, we are the people who need to be redeemed, and we're pushing against it constantly. And God is the one who physically has to bring us out of that. And how is that done? Now we get the binding of Isaac and the Akedah. So the type could go all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah is my point, and Lot. Anyway,
I love that. It's God remembered Abraham, and he saved Lot.
Right.
So that means God, and it's the same thing with Israel in Egypt. It's not like God's up there in heaven looking at all the slaves in the world and all the people being oppressed and just says, I think those people are having a particularly rough time. I think I'll go rescue those guys from that oppressor. That's not it. It's a covenant related trajectory throughout history from the beginning. Like there were other people who were in slavery in the world. Right. But God brought Israel out of Egypt. He didn't go and rescue all the slaves everywhere in the world. And it's because of a covenant purpose, God's big term plan, which of course is the gospel. In your seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed. There's a blessing that God has given in the Abrahamic covenant. There's nowhere else to find a blessing. There might be a lot of little shops along the highway that say blessing here, get your blessing here, get your blessing here. if they're not anchored in the Abrahamic covenant and the gospel, it's not really a blessing.
So I think that we're coming to the end of our time here. I think that we've focused on the first portion of this Torah portion. And for those who are in the 1 year, I think that there's so much that can be said about the Akedah, right? And we've already talked very, very, just brushed the surface of the types and these kind of things. I hope that what we've done is we've given you something to think about for the portion that most people, I think that most people on the Shabbat where they look at this Torah portion, most people are going to focus on the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, right? As it relates to
eyes
Yeshua.
kind of go rule right to that major.
Boom,
event.
laser focus there. And I hope that what we've done is given you a little bit to lead up to that, because I think that most people are going to be able to look at the Akedah and get all sorts of good fruit out of that passage, right? It's right there on a platter for you, right? You can feast on that passage all day long. And so I hope that we've given you a little bit to lead up to that, to get the mind moving and thinking as you move into this. We will be back next week for our next passage, which is the life of Sarah. And we hope that this has been beneficial for you. Thank you so much.